Thank you for being here. I'd like to start off on a little bit of a personal note. So before I joined Trustly, I worked as an investment manager for an investment firm called Kinnevik, which is a Swedish company investing from its own balance sheet. And at the time, we had a market cap of around 8 billion euros. Our greatest claim to fame was probably we were early on in spotting the opportunity of e-commerce. We were a lead investor in Zalando, which I think is a company that requires little introduction. But why I mention this is that also part of the job was every year we had these strategy offsites, right? And it was always a topic for discussion. What's the next big thing? What's the next big thing in tech? What's the next big thing in consumer trends and so on? And I sometimes felt that these conversations could almost be a little bit forced, right? Almost like a solution looking for a problem to be solved. Example being big data. Everybody was talking about big data. Very few were able to say what is it actually, and more importantly, what is it good for? Internet of Things, blockchain technology. There were a couple of these. So I guess my point is that in this time we live in with rapid technology changes, everybody is looking for a next thing. And sometimes I think that search might actually lead you to even kind of overestimate an opportunity, or maybe more accurately overestimate how fast it's going to be having an impact. And in this role at Trustly, I obviously spend a lot of time talking about open banking and open banking payments. And while most people are very positive and there is a real hype, and you can see it here walking around and speaking to people at events like this one, but there are also questions like this one that comes up sometimes. Like, has open banking failed? Maybe followed on by things like open banking has been here as the next big thing for years now. Yet few merchants offer open banking, and consumers don't really know what it is. So I think it's fair to say that maybe my old colleagues at Kinnevik is now thinking about something like that. Like, is it time to look for the next big things? And again, I can tell you that I personally actually left Kinnevik when my investment committee refused an investment into Trustly. So I decided to join Trustly instead. And that probably tells you a little bit about my personal conviction for this particular trend. But I thought it could be a good thing to sort of try and frame open banking in the context of technology adoption and how it usually plays out. How does a technology shift actually materialize? So starting from the beginning, so first things first, a new innovation is born, right? This could be something like a consumer product, like the iPhone or digital camera being usually quoted in literature. You've probably seen those. But it can also be more of a fundamental technology shift, like the internet itself, or open banking in our case. And in the case of Trustly, we actually predate open banking. We predate PSD2. The company was founded in 2008, and back then we didn't call it open banking. We called it account-to-account payments or online bank payments. So I guess the question is should the expectation be that a new technology instantly changes the world? Well, a little bit of a rhetorical question, right? But I think the answer is no. And if you think about, again, like the internet, I mean, we had the dot-com bubble in the late 1990s because people then thought that this will instantly change the world, right? It didn't, not back then. But I think it's fair to say that most of us here would probably agree that nobody in the 90s or 80s would actually have imagined how big the change would actually be when it came. So I think this is like a common bias in people, that we think that technology will change things faster. We're talking about what's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years, right? And we tend to overestimate the speed of those trends. But we actually do underestimate the final impact that it has when it gets widely adopted. So instead of a big bang change, like on this page, what we typically see is more of an S-curve, right? So this is what you get if you plot performance or adoption of a new technology on the y-axis as a function of time and effort put into it on the x-axis. And of course, directionally, this is a very intuitive relationship. The more kind of effort and time you put into new technology, the more adoption you will get. And it's even so that, like in the very early stages here, you can have a case where cost is relatively high, product quality can be relatively low. I mean, if you take the iPhone again as an example, I mean, I don't know how many of you were actually buying the first version of that, like the iPhone 1. I remember I had one friend who got it. We were all making fun of him because he essentially had a phone that you can make calls from, right? It was little more than a glorified phone book at that point. But I don't think the directional relationship here is necessarily the main point. It's rather the shape of the curve. So in particular, how you see, early on you have a fermenting stage when the technology is getting built with quite small marginal return on the effort. Then you move into more of a takeoff stage, where you see more rapid adoption of technology. And then finally, towards the end of this technology, you hit the limits and it sort of tapers out. So who are then the adopters of new technology? We usually early on talk about early adopters or innovators. And these are the users that come in the very first stages, like my iPhone friend. And that can of course be driven by a personal preference. But what you will find is that in a lot of cases, it's actually driven by users that have a special need. So I think going back to sort of open banking, if you look at Trustly, we have several merchants in niche cases, like in financial services, for example, where you had merchants that had some significant challenges with payments. This could be executing fast payouts or being able to receive high-value tickets with high level of security and to limit sort of fraud and money laundering issues. An example being from our merchant book, Avanza Bank in Sweden, which is a retail investment platform. And before they started using Trustly, they had a high reliance on manual bank transfers. And of course, like even an early iteration of automated bank transfers was quite a great improvement for them. So you basically have a group here with a high tolerance for risk, if you like, or risk about the new technology, and thus a willingness to experiment. But it's also the case that most of us are a little bit more risk averse than that, right? We want some evidence. We want something to prove that it's worth making the investment in the new technology. And thus, we tend to sort of use the success of the early innovators to prove the value of the new technology. And that's when we sort of come in. And at some point, there will be a mentality shift where you start going from sort of skepticism to more belief. You stop thinking about reasons why you shouldn't use the new technology or all of the obstacles it has. You instead start thinking about this actually really works, and how can I use that, and how can it benefit myself? And that's when things kind of start moving, and you move out of this first stage on the S-curve into sort of the takeoff stage. And just kind of pausing for 1 second on that. I think as a consumer, this is quite a sound strategy. It doesn't really have much of a problem with it. But if you're a business, it can actually carry some strategic risk, right? So this is a conscious decision, and I think people being here is probably a bit of a proof that you actually do care about new trends, right? Because of course, being late in adopting something that will carry change can actually put you at a disadvantage towards your own competition. So how does that relate to open banking? And I hope that what I've said so far is obvious enough building up to a point that I'm trying to make, right? So yes, indeed, my argument would be that we are about here, but simply on that curve. So we have our innovators that have creating an evidence for and creating a business case. I mentioned before financial services as an industry vertical, but I think there are other examples as well. Also looking outside Trustly in other countries, you have, for example, Ideal in the Netherlands, which is essentially an open banking method, and is the dominating payment method online in that country. I think they've been able to achieve that through a combination of a strong merchant proposition and also a strong consumer proposition. So on the merchant side, you basically deliver a real-time payment confirmation together with a payment guarantee, and also very high sort of consumer reach. There is no added registration needed, and the slides keep moving. Is that me? And on the consumer side, likewise, it's a seamless user experience, right? It works really well on mobile. You don't require additional registration, and also you're leaning on the credibility of your bank. But let's take a few more examples of this. And when I talk about open banking, I think there are typically around 5 areas that people raise as concerns. And I would like to go through them and say a few things about that. So if we start with the first one, open banking isn't stable. Okay, so I think there is a perception sometimes that open banking, since it's built on banks which is fragmented and different countries work differently, that there are issues with uptimes or that for some reason it's not stable technology. And while I think it is true that, and we'll probably talk about this in panel as well, that a lot of the APIs are not really there yet where we want them to be in terms of quality. And it's also true that banks are built on their kind of legacy infrastructure. But it's also the case that you have providers, and that's where somebody like ourselves, like Trustly, comes into the picture, that can bridge those gaps by ourselves being in the flow of funds. So I think of it a little bit like if you see open banking as technology, as the internet, we are building the application a little bit like Google did with search on the internet. So the fundamentals are there, but you need to kind of put it together to be a fully fledged payment method to actually work really well. So us being in the flow of funds means that we don't just initiate a payment using APIs to the banks. We actually also receive the payment, we reconcile, and we track the order, right? And looking at our own data points, we did over the last 12 months more than 100 billion SEK in volume. In addition, we did close to 9 billion euros, and in addition to that, also around 4 billion pounds, which together with some other smaller currencies that we're working with put us north of 20 billion euros. And I don't really think you can do that on the basis of an unstable technology. So another concern or area of concern is that this is a local phenomenon. So you hear that, yes, in the Nordics, in the Baltics, banks work really well, and there is a strong preference for bank payments. And funny we may be Nordic people, right? I'm here to tell you that that's not really the case. So yes, I do think that people like to pay with money they have in their bank account, that they can see control that is their own, right? And yes, I do think that people like to be able to access that money through a seamless way, same as they can access the money they have in their online bank. But no, I definitely don't think this is sort of coded into the DNA or in the culture of the Baltics or Nordic people. I think it's just the case that, in these regions we had early enough, we had banking systems that supported the building out of good payment methods as a whole, right? And in particular 2 items. So first being high penetration of online banking, and second, widespread use of EIDs for strong customer authentication. Again, going back to sharing some of our data here with you guys, in the UK today we have more than 5 million consumers using Trustly. We're only one of the providers, right? So this is definitely spreading. What about cards then? So that's another one you hear, like, okay, why do I need anything else? Cards convert really well. And I can tell you that I and my team have built several business cases only on the basis of proving the value of using Trustly as a fallback to cards. That's it, right? Don't even replace us. Just use us when the cards are declined. And it's, fair enough, cards have a decent enough conversion rate, probably maybe around 85% or so. We can actually beat that. So we're seeing average conversion rates of more than 90%. We're seeing some use cases as high as 97% on return user. And we see acceptance rates of up to 99 or even higher percent. And if you think about it, it's not so strange. I mean, a main reason for decline is insufficient funds, right? So I have my debit card attached to one bank account. It's out of funds. Happens to me all the time. Maybe because I'm sharing it with my family or something, but it does. But that doesn't mean I'm out of money with my bank, right? So by just simply being able to display multiple bank accounts, I can use whatever I want to pay from. You actually reduce insufficient fund declines. So number 4 here. open bank can't process refunds. So refunds and can dispute management is another thing. Now, if you take Trustly, for example, and I think here again is where you can't just say, okay, open banking is the bank APIs and it sorts out refunds for you. It doesn't, right? You need a provider that do that. But our very first product was actually a payout product. So we are able today to move money from a merchant account to any consumer bank account in Europe in basically real time. And if you combine that capability with an automated system for reconciliation and payment orders, well, then you get something that can deliver to you not just refund management, but actually you can take full control of the user experience here. So you're thinking about a scenario where you have a customer on the phone complaining because they didn't get their money back for something they returned a couple of days ago. Common support case, right? The ability to being able to release that fund on the call, okay, go into your bank, see your balance is updated, is pretty powerful, and I can assure you, you will win the loyalty of that customer. So what about UX then? Of course, talking about payments and payment adoption, there are two sides to this. So there is one, the merchant side, we talked about that. Merchants might be mainly concerned about cost optimization and operational efficiency. Second, you also need your users to actually want to pay with the method and go through it for it to have any impact. And I think fair to say that we are working a lot in this area, again, as a provider to make this better and better. And we are soon to be releasing a very new take on, in particular, on return user experience. But even today, for example, looking at our UK or Swedish product and comparing it to some of the other sort of innovative payment methods that are out there, open banking does indeed provide you with very few clicks, so quite a seamless user experience. And if you think about it, all you have is there in your phone, right? So it kind of boils down to just the bare bones of a payment, which is basically an instruction, verification, and confirmation, and that's it. And then it's just about optimizing each of those steps. So with that, I hope I've been able to at least give you a few data points and a little bit of an evidence to support my thesis that open banking is indeed entering a sort of a takeoff stage. Happy to hear the views of others on this topic as well in a minute. But if you need even further proof of this, I would also suggest that you actually speak to some of the actual early adopters that we are currently working with, get their perspective. Probably more powerful than from me. And I think it's also something you should take back and ask yourself, like, where do you actually want to be on that technology S-curve? So with that, thank you very much. And Daniel, I suppose back to you.